This is Liberating Faith, a She Loves podcast. We are a chorus of voices creating space and weaving together the world we long for, a world that starts with love. This is for people who walk in a faith that remembers God is love. This is for people who want to live out a faith rooted and grounded in love. And as Maya Angelou reminds us, love liberates. Liberating Faith invites you into conversations, stories, and perspectives from around the globe. She Loves has always been about creating both safe and brave spaces on the internet, inviting a chorus of voices to create culture together. We embrace an anti-racist faith, a decolonizing faith, a feminist faith, an affirming faith, because we are liberated together. Here, may you feel rooted and grounded in love. May you be expanded in your listening. May something in you become a little more unbound. May something in you soften. May you find what you are looking for now. This is Liberating Faith. Welcome.
Okay, welcome to the podcast today. I'm Nicole. I'm with the She Loves leadership team, and I have invited three of my very best friends to join me today because we're all hot messes when it comes to church and faith. But today we're going to actually be talking about losing our religion and moving closer to Jesus. I think right now you see a lot on social media about people who are deconstructing and they equate that with backsliding, and that's not the case for most people who have started this journey of re-examining their faith. And so I have walked a long road with each one of these ladies joining us today, and the road has led closer to Jesus. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. So my pals are Karina Lowen, Rochelle Fair, and Shaylee Hugendorn, or as my kids call her, Hugendugendorn, because her name's not long enough. So I'm just going to go and ask each one of them to do a brief intro and to include where their church affiliation was growing up and just a couple of details about where they're at right now. So Karina, do you want to give us a start?
Sure. My name is Karina, and I grew up in the Alliance Church. And then when I got married, was involved in more MB, Mennonite Brethren churches. So that would be first 20 years of my life. And what else am I supposed to say? I forgot.
Anything else you want to share about where you're at right now, or just
right now? Currently, I am involved in a non-denominational church here in Abbotsford, BC, where we live, called The Bridge, and am involved in various leadership roles there. And I live here in Abbotsford with my 5 kids and my partner, Josh. And there you go. Tag, right. Whoever's next.
Thanks. Shaylee.
Yes, I'm Shaylee Hoogly Doogly Dorn. I married a Dutch guy. Yes, I am originally from Prince George, which is the Land de Henne, unceded territory, and I grew up in 0 churches. So we went to Roman Catholic Church actually, maybe for Christmas or when my parents felt guilty or could like wrangle us, all the kids, there's 4 of us, to a church. So I didn't grow up in a church. I didn't start going till later, which we'll probably get into. I am now here on the unceded territory of the Katzie and Coquitlam people, otherwise known as Port Coquitlam. And I am a teacher and an event planner and a fierce mental health advocate. I have a podcast called This is Bipolar, and I have some kids and a husband.
I can't believe you forgot Max.
Oh, and I am a fur mom and the kind you make fun of. So there's that.
Absolutely. Shaylee sends me pictures of Max dressed up. Yeah. So he's got clothes. And Rochelle was my guest last time, but Rochelle, do you want to do another intro?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Rochelle Dean Fair, and I was born and raised on Treaty 1 territory here in Manitoba. So I grew up in a Pentecostal church in Winnipeg. Kind of a couple of them switched over to non-denominational at one point. And now I'm living in Morden, Manitoba, a very tiny little small Mennonite town. And I don't really have a church affiliation at the moment. I'm a full-time nursing student and a mama to 6 kids.
All right. And as you know, I said I'm Nicole. I grew up, was born into an Alliance church. We went then to a Pentecostal church that became non-denominational and became a mega church, which I left about 10 years ago to pastor at an MB church for a bit. And I've been free floating for about 3 years. So that's a nutshell. So everyone can understand where we're coming from in this. We were kind of talking about this ahead of time, and we could do our own whole spin-off podcast on this topic because there are so many elements to re-examining your faith and making the choice to walk away from a faith tradition community that you've been a part of and integrate, like, what's the word I'm looking for? You're integrated into it. English is hard. I got to say too, I'm also in university and I've been writing a lot of papers. And so the words aren't as wordsy as they normally are, but here we go. It's hard to walk away from these intense church communities that become your life. And like, if you listened last time, I hosted, Rochelle and I were talking about growing up in very similar contexts and ending up at the same mega church. And in that church, like, you were there always, like that was your life. You volunteered every time the doors were open. Your kids were there. You were like enmeshed in it. And so leaving evangelicalism isn't just switching your faith belief, but it is oftentimes leaving your friends and your family and your community and your support. And so we're going to talk a little bit about all of that, and we'll see where we go. So my first question, you guys can just jump in whenever and make this conversational, but I would like to hear from you guys. What was the first thread you began to pull on evangelicalism? Like, where did this start for you? Where you just started going, maybe this isn't exactly what I thought it is, or maybe it's not what I need it to be, or is this even the Jesus-y way? So what were what was something that was really the first thread that you began to pull that began to unravel your neatly woven faith?
I know for me, that feels like a tricky question to answer, because my experience was more like, I want to say that I was on one hand, like, believing what we were being taught about Jesus, about God. And then I would like act as though that was true and run into trouble. And so my experience almost feels more like the death of a thousand cuts, or like where all of a sudden I'm following a trail, and then all of a sudden I'm like outside the fold and going, what did I just unravel something? I thought I was like being faithful, and then all of a sudden you're just like, oh no, you're out now. And so it's hard to say where was the first thread. Was it believing God was good? So then I started questioning things like predestination, or was it believing that God, we all had the image of God? And then I'm like, but then how come women are always less? Or was it believe, like, pick the thing, like there's all of these.
You made the classic mistake of taking Jesus at his word instead of following the church structure.
So it's
That's
sort
such
of
a newbie mistake, Karina.
I know. I should have, and I think, like, just my way is to go. I would tend to challenge things and just go, okay, but we said this, and that's not this. So like, what's up? But then, if you're a woman, can you even do that? Like, I'm
No, you're supposed to stay quiet in the church.
Yes. I'm
The Bible
chief
says
among
so.
sinners, apparently.
The
for many
Bible clearly
reasons.
says, I'm going to struggle today with a lot of our inside jokes. And one of
I know.
we talk a lot about how the Bible clearly says, and if you have to start a sentence that way, maybe it's not as clear as you think it is. And
Indeed.
so I totally get what you're saying, though, and especially as a woman, and this is, I think, where so many women who are in this process of re-examining things have landed. Like, they're a woman with a brain who asked a question, and suddenly they were ousted, and their husbands were pulled aside and asked to get control of their woman, and all of those things.
Yeah.
So I totally hear what you're saying. So Shaylee and Rochelle, are those like similar experiences, or did you have other things that were like catalysts for you?
Yeah, I think that when you were talking about the thread, I think just a little background. I didn't say where I ended up. I said I didn't go to church. So I started going to church probably like regularly, and then, got all involved and asked Jesus into my heart and all the things, probably not till like I was 19. And if we're truly honest, it was because I was dating a guy that couldn't date someone that didn't go to the church.
Missionary dating, it works. What were they saying in youth group?
So he was cool. He was in a band. So I was like, okay, I'll try this church thing out. And
the worship band?
no, they were like
A Christian band?
It was a Christian band, but they were like the rebel Christian band. They were like, like kind of like Rage Against the Machine, but the Christian version. That was very interesting.
I think my kids would call those tryhards. I'm not sure. Right.
So I was like, it opened up my world, like, oh, maybe it isn't, they use like, maybe everybody isn't just like nerdy Bible thumpers. Cool, I'm going to check it out. And so then I went, and being an anxious person, you guys all know I live with bipolar 2 disorder. I liked the whole rules and parameters, because I grew up in a home that's like, my parents are amazing, but it's very, very different and chaotic and lots of things going on. And so I kind of liked I kind of at first liked the little box. And so when you were saying unraveling, I kind of felt like maybe I didn't have something really well woven together for me as a child, which was cool. But I tried to put something together. And so there were always loose ends, because it was always, I listened and I wanted to be like everybody else. And I'm like, maybe I can be somewhat submissive, probably not, but I can try really hard. And I think what happened was I felt like I was always an outsider, and I had a very different childhood than many girls I knew that grew up in like purity culture, etc. And so I felt like this extreme pressure to follow these rules so that no one knows that I haven't been here all along. So I think that's kind of where I started. So I was like, so then I went like all in front of everybody, but there was a whole bunch of loose things going on in here. And especially, which I'm sure we'll talk so much more about the woman thing, but I've always been loud, and I've always been justice oriented, and I've always been, kind of fall into roles of leadership. And I didn't know how to squelch that. And so that caused a lot of difficulties for me in the church.
Yeah. A woman who likes to talk, imagine that.
I know.
With opinions.
I know.
So you guys hit on a lot of stuff that I could really relate to. I have a hard time also pinpointing where the pieces started to unravel, but as you were talking, this memory came to mind. Okay, actually 2 memories. First of all, do you remember the WWJD bracelets in the 90s, right? Yeah, so I started thinking about that a lot, but like in a really literal sense, right? So I remember it was Christmas Eve, and we're all talking about the story of Jesus, and I'm telling the kids, baby Jesus was born, and there's this manger, and they had nothing, so they had to put him in, with this hay and stuff. And then we go to Christmas Eve service at a mega church, and it was colored lights and smoke shows and cappuccinos in the foyer, and there was a literal acrobat who performed as part of Christmas Eve service.
She was
Just
stunning,
like that
but
first
still.
night.
just like in Bethlehem, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Sweet
And so
baby
I'm
Jesus and the acrobat.
the next Christmas story. Yeah.
Yes. Part 2, the sequel.
Right. So for me, it was that just all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, it wasn't even all of a sudden, it was slow, it was building, it was all these questions that I'd pushed down and suppressed my whole life, really. And I'm looking at this and I'm looking at my kids looking at this, and I'm like, what is happening here? If I believe Jesus is walking right here with me, right here beside me, this is what he came for? Is this really what he's interested in? And it was a whole series of questions like that that started to just build. And then before I knew it, I'm looking at the Bible going, is it the literal word of God? You know, did he actually mean, you know, take your pick, whatever? Yeah, that's what it was. It was just, I had to get to a point where I wasn't afraid to ask the questions, not just to myself, but, well, first of all, to myself. I had to be not afraid anymore to ask the questions.
Yeah.
And to have opinions. And that's always been one of my biggest downfalls in the church, is being a female with very loud vocal opinions. Anybody else?
I see that hand. I'm singing that praise song with you all.
Yeah.
Here's to all the loud women building the church. I mean, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For
And
sure. And
that's
I think
sorry. And the
No, go ahead.
understanding that that's a negative thing, right? Like, it was always a negative thing. And I still haven't shed the whole being like a troublemaker.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
And I think that I couldn't live like that. And that was a big part of it. I couldn't live like that anymore. I was just so tired. And I remember this story, which I don't know why, Rochelle, but it made me think of this story. I remember one of the biggest unravelings after I got sick. I didn't get diagnosed until I was 30 something in 2010. And there had been a lot of buildup and a lot of not being able to talk to anybody about my mental health in the church, or getting very much like, oh, you know, just do not be anxious. Here's your Bible verse, and that kind of thing. And I make fun because, like, I'm a sarcastic person, and I know lots of people meant well. And, you know, I love so many people in the church I was in for a very long time, but I didn't ever feel like I was slowly dying and possibly literally in my head wanting to disappear. And I went, and it's a whole other story about how I got diagnosed, etc. But I remember when I was just trying to come back to the church, and some people knew and some people didn't know. And I remember sitting in the pew. I mean, I was really involved in church. I was running this moms group. It was a community moms group, doing all these things. So I show up and I tried to get dressed up, and I'm like, okay, act normal, right? But then, of course, that one of the songs was, I'm not gonna hurt your ears by trying to sing it, but you know the song where the chorus goes over and over and over, like, he will come and save you, like, over and over. You know, it's pretty beautiful. But I started, like, my feelings started coming out of my eyes, and they were just like leaking. And I couldn't, you know how usually you can get it together or whatever. I couldn't stop. And I was like, and this church isn't like a messy church where you can go and like cry and be yourself. It's like you talk about being messy together, but you don't actually ever get messy together. Mm-hmm. And so I remember, like, I went to the bathroom, still couldn't stop, leaking. And then I had to go out in the car, and then I put the whole seat back, and I just sobbed because I just felt like, will he, like, I just felt like it felt like all those voices that told me, like, you know, you just have to pray more, get outside, or get rid, you know, like, I can heal through trusting more and believing more. And I remember thinking that was the first time that's like, I don't know if he's going to come and literally save me from this illness. So what do I do with that? and how can I still show up in this space and or believe? I don't know. That's was a big moment for me there. Yeah.
I think that's a common crisis that people in evangelicalism have. And I've watched it happen in my own circle because I was diagnosed with cancer 3 months after my dad was. And we had already left the church. We were living in Morden at the time. And I'm so glad I landed in an MB community that really did well at suffering. Like really made a lot of space for suffering. And it wasn't a bless me club. It was like, things are hard and you can just sit there and let it be hard for a bit and let us make you soup and clean your house. And it was so nurturing and good, because what was happening in my parents' church community was a same support, same love from friends, but a desperate belief in healing that we didn't see fulfilled for my dad. And so when my dad passed, his friends had a massive crisis of faith. And they were with him on the daily, even the day before he died. They were at the hospital and praying and believing, and they were so faithful and genuine. They had no space for grief, and they had no plan for what happens if healing doesn't come the way you think it should.
Right.
And we've seen that play out over and over and over again with friends from the same church or same faith belief system, that when this, name it and claim it, be well, be healthy thing doesn't pan out because humanity, there's no space for that.
Right.
And I think that does Jesus a huge disservice, because the Bible clearly says, Jesus says that he will be there for us in all of these situations. And we watched in his life how that unfolds, that even though he knew he was going to bring Lazarus back, he stood there and cried with everybody else.
So good.
And we don't, in evangelicalism, we don't make space for that. We need all of the high stuff. We need all of the healing, happiness, happy, clappy, slappy, whatever things in order to authenticate our faith, rather than letting God draw near and letting Emmanuel envelop us in the place that we're at.
Right.
Yeah.
I wonder if I was going to try and put like an umbrella over all of these varied experiences, it almost seems like because one of the main tenets of evangelicalism is what hell is, the afterlife, all of that, right? And that is a construct that keeps us in line and keeps us coming back, and all of those things. And it's almost like, and it also, I think, creates a traumatic response in people, whether that's fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So a lot of Christianity is caught in this chronic fawn response and other responses, right? And what I'm hearing in each of our stories is almost like the promise of being saved from hell in the future, all of a sudden one day couldn't keep us anymore, because we were experiencing too much hell in the here and now. So it was like the fear of future hell got outweighed by present hell. And we needed a construct of not a God that would bypass us, sweet by and by, I'll fly away, oh glory. And instead we needed something that would be here and now and present and with us in the middle of whatever that hell felt like. And it's like getting over that thing of like, I am less scared of a future hell because I'm experiencing too much hell now. Something has to give.
That brought to mind when I went through my divorce. So I found myself a single mom in a small Mennonite town, trying to raise 4 kids and trying to figure out where I belonged in the church world now as a single mother. and realizing that for a lot of people, I no longer belonged in the church world. And that was another big turning point for me, because I mean, Jesus, he was there the whole time. That's how I got through that. He was there. That's what he came for, right? For the broken, for the hurting, for the whatever you want to talk about. But that's where the church world stepped back and went, oh, well, you can't sing or whatever anymore. I don't know.
When
You're
our
right.
when our salvation rests on the idea that the wages of sin is death, and that Jesus came to give us an abundant life. Therefore, if your life is not abundant, you're paying the wages of sin. It bounces back and forth along this line that leaves out the fullness of the humanity that we are in, and Jesus's ability to be in the middle of all of it with us. Yesterday on Twitter, someone had made a comment about how they were at a funeral for a friend who was not a believer and was really struggling with that, and was relaying this to someone else, and they're like, well, we have the hope of glory. And she said, well, he's not actually Christian. And the person's like, oh, and then they just walked away and left her with this devastation. And so I just commented, I said, I don't have answers. I have a lot of wanderings, but there are some things that I know, that if we believe that Jesus defeated death, and that our physical life is temporary and our soul life is eternal, there's got to be a mechanism for Jesus's grace to transfer past our last breath and still find us.
Otherwise, what is grace?
Exactly. And it was these questions and these thoughts that I was labeled a heretic. And so now I invite others into low-grade heresy with me as we actually think about the ways of Jesus.
Low-grade heresy.
At school, I say that all the time. I'm like, okay, we're having a theological debate, and I'm like, okay, can we just step into some low-grade heresy for a minute and think maybe there's another way? And I think that for me has been like the line is, if someone is going to condemn me or someone else to eternal damnation for something that I'm pretty sure Jesus already covered, I'm going to say, maybe call me a heretic if you want, but maybe Jesus is bigger than that. Yeah. And maybe God has made space in a way for all of this. And so I think, when you think about the construct of religion and the rules of a church, they're rarely the same as the way of Jesus. Just because humans want to make sense of things. And in this faith, there's an invitation to sit in mystery and to not know everything. And to believe in the possibility that there are ways through things on a spiritual soul level that we can't clearly map, but that Jesus is there in it for us. And I think that's where, for me, that was my leap sort of away from standard evangelicalism into, for me, it felt like an abyss. I had no idea where I was going, but I was like diving in head first. So for each of you, like, you had a moment where there was definitely like a break with your faith tradition. And you had to sort of confess this to people in your world that, yes, this is no longer where I am over here now.
Yes.
What was that moment, and how did you prepare yourself, and what happened after all of your important people realized that you were no longer going to be in that space that you had once inhabited?
Yeah.
Who wants to go first?
Go for it.
If you're not watching this on video, everyone's like wincing and like, like, I didn't mean.
Everybody's thinking.
Triggered a whole flashback of like tough conversations, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But
there was a couple conversations I had with people about this, and Nick, I think you might have been the first, honestly. You were my safe spot to land.
Which is for Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah.
For those who don't know, it's not actual witchcraft. We're just talking about
Maybe that's a
the
different
assumption
podcast.
that a woman with a brain asking questions and going counter church culture have previously been burnt at stakes or drowned.
Yeah. That would have been us.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, the moment where I had to break, I don't know if I want to dive into the details too deeply, but it was when I realized that I could connect my Indigenous culture and my Indigenous beliefs and how I practice that in my regular everyday life and Jesus. And that they weren't separate things. I like in my world that I grew up in, that was literal heresy and literal paganism, and you might be dabbling in devil worship. So recognizing that they were two things that were one thing, but that within the church where I was, that was not okay. And there's so much to this. We do not have time to go into it all. But seeing how church interactions with non-evangelical, non-white Jesus is not just a thing of, it's just not just a problem of the past, but one that is ongoing. And today, when I couldn't reconcile those things anymore is when I had to walk away and say, I can't be okay with this for myself or my children or my people. And that was it. That was the moment. That was the breaking point for me.
Whew, that's hard.
I can feel just the trickiness of like being in one sense pushed out because you can't show up. Like it's not so much that you want to leave, right? Like it's like you want to be seen and held, and that your experience of like, I feel like I'm following Jesus and I feel like I'm experiencing some different things. And it's like, no. And it's these systems that we're in that for their own eternal safety have to sacrifice people instead of beliefs. And I think that's one of these key problems that we keep running into, is that so long as we elevate beliefs over the dignity and experience of people,
yes,
we're going to perpetuate harm. And when a system is unwilling to question itself, despite the carnage, I think eventually you get to a point of just saying like, I don't want to leave, but how can I stay?
Yeah. How can I stay? Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like,
it's at a point, or it gets to a point where the culture that's been created by the church is what everybody now is fighting to maintain. And the humanity is within that is forgotten. And yeah.
Mine dragged because I was just so confused, and I was so used to going first in a lot of situations in my family of origin for things and in the church. And I thought, well, if I don't keep asking these questions, or if I'm not, pushing forward for women or this or that, then who is, right? Like, come on, Shaylee. But so I felt like, well, I didn't want to be, I don't know, there's always this idea in the church of the person that just gave up and left, right? Like there's all this idea that it's a failure almost, right? Instead of like, yeah, but look how much you could do where you're at. And it's like, yeah, but it's slowly killing my soul, right? And it started to become where it was like, I knew there was a problem when it was Jesus was starting in my head to sound like and look like the older white men, sometimes younger, all the white men on the pulpit. And I was like, yikes, like, no, this. And so I just couldn't figure out when or how or what, because like that's the only church. I mean, I went to a couple for like a year here or 2 years there, but I'm talking like, I don't know, I'm not good at math, but most likely 15-ish years.
A lot, Shaylee.
Yeah, a lot. And people have been
That's a
there
number.
when I had the kids. They've been, what, not baptized, but the other thing that they do.
Dedicated.
Yeah, right. And clearly I was super dedicated. But I just got so tired. And I remember I have these big ideas, and I did this big event. I had this idea of doing this thing to bring together community. Same with the moms group. It was a community group. And I was always being questioned, like, why aren't you praying? Why isn't there a Bible study? This isn't telling the gospel. And I'm like, no, like, we're like inviting people to like be together. And when people started feeling like projects, I was like, I'm out. Like, I can't. It was always like every week, like bring your neighbor or your unsaved friend or your non-Christian, or always giving these othering terms and not in a positive way, right? Or
my favorite was pre-churched
or pre-believer. It's like, honestly,
for frick's sake, guys.
Well, listening to Shaylee, like I'm having all these like flashbacks of all of the like catchphrases and evangelicalism, like good people don't leave good churches and grow where you're planted, and all of those types of things.
Oh, wait a minute. Do we actually say that? Yes, we do sometimes. Wait a second.
Yeah.
So it's all of those things. I'm hearing that, like, I think there's things that we learn implicitly that are taught to us, and yet then there's subversive messages too that hold us tight. And I hear that in what you're saying, Shaylee, like, the frustration and the desire to move towards Jesus, and yet the sort of cage of this is how it's always been done, and this is, if you question, then that's doubt, and if you don't come, then it's backsliding, and it's, if you're a good person and you stay in the good church because we're the good church, and yet you're missing the Jesus mark in all of this.
I'm hearing again like this weight of accusation that keeps people in line, right? Because like when you've been like, because I think all of us in our church stories were as involved, we were up to the ceiling as far as women were concerned in every area, and pushing it a little bit too, right? But so we were not low investment people, and I don't even want to imply that there are more or less, but just in terms of the function of the church, we were highly invested in helping the function of the church in whatever ways we were allowed. And then you start having these experiences where you feel like you're following Jesus. And it sort of is like, if we believe the Bible and Jesus holds the keys to death and hell, it's like my friend Brad says, like, what do you think he's going to do with them? But then we start living like that's true. And we discover it's actually a different Jesus that we're following, one that's very fragile, one that's actually like, Shaylee, you better do some saving work, because like, maybe it's like Jesus plus a little Shaylee sauce there, and a little Karina, sprinkles on top, and a little of Nicole's like special secret recipe thing. And it sort of is like, Jesus actually isn't enough in that construct, because you better behave, you better come correct, or you're gonna find yourself on the outs, because Jesus will crumble and fall apart. If you were to just say, but what if Jesus gets what he wants in the end, which is connection and relationship with all things? What if we trusted the process? What if life is long? What if death actually has been defeated? What if that affects how you live? So then you start living like that, and you're like, oh no, the system can't handle that. That's too much liberation, too much freedom, too much trust.
Mhm.
And that's where the bizarre element of evangelicalism comes in, because like, yes to what you said, and then there's a point, a magical invisible line that all the dudes can see, that's like, nope, that's too much Shaylee, and nope, that's too much Rochelle, and you know, Rochelle, you can lead worship, but you can't talk Bible-y things in between songs, and Shaylee, you can plan an event, but let's not talk about mental health. And Karina, you're too leadery. Like, you need to dial down your leaderiness. and these are and those are the things, right? Like, you're handed responsibility, but only to this point. And if you move around at all, then suddenly, you know, you're power hungry and devious and Jezebel-y and all of these things. And it's a mind mess. Before we started, we talked about words that we should say and shouldn't say. And I get really close there. But it messes with your mind, and that affects your sense of self and pulls you away from a Jesus way and away from community. How can you be in community when there's something wrong with you?
Yeah.
When it's not wrong with you, but you're told it's wrong with you.
Yeah. And what's the biggest thing that we want as human beings? We want to belong. And it started as a place of belonging for me, right? And if you do all the right things, you really belong, because you go to the Tuesday night, and then there's the Wednesday night, and then there's the coffee night, and then there's the volunteer night, and then and you're all hanging out with each other, and you're all, you know, and there's these pre-believers out there that you don't have time to hang out with because you've got to do all these other, do you know what I mean? And it's so confusing. And so what kept me, I didn't feel like I was like I didn't feel aligned with myself, because I was so afraid of losing that belonging. I was so afraid of, also ego-wise, like I was known, like, let's be honest, I was known in the church, and I was doing things, and you know, people liked some of the things that I was doing, right? I wasn't just this, you know, and so it was just all that was tied into it. And then I started hanging out with different communities, like the She Loves community. It was been huge in this, and the Dangerous Women that we hang out with and that we're a part of. And I started having friends and being in contact with more of my LGBTQ 2SQIA friends, and I felt like going there, even though I was like, oh guys, but don't worry, I don't believe that. I'm just going. But I felt like putting my body in this space that, you know, doesn't see people with mental illness as full and whole people, doesn't see, you know, my LGBTQ friends as full and whole people. And I couldn't sit there anymore. I just couldn't do it. And, but it wasn't like a grand announcement, because I was in such a big church. Everyone assumed I was going to the different service. And then I think when people kind of finally figured out, the worst thing is that no one said anything.
Oh, yes.
No one said anything.
Yep. I could name on, well, like 2 fingers. It's 2 fingers, guys. 2 fingers.
I think I only had one, and I won't tell you which one.
And when you've built your whole world around it, Shaylee, like you were talking about, you're there, your whole world is the church. I don't know, when I read things online about, you know, people coming against deconstructing and making it sound like we're all just trying to go have a good time, I don't know. This was
There are better times to be had than doing this.
Yeah.
I think actual backsliding would probably be more fun.
Yeah.
But
Well, at least it would be a slide.
Yeah.
well, there you go.
Yeah.
And I think that's it, is that when we start talking about like the perception of what we are living versus the reality of it,
Yeah.
it's not the party people think it is.
Mhm.
And nobody would choose this unless
Oh.
you're called into a space of drawing nearer to the way of Jesus.
Right. And it doesn't even necessarily feel like you are drawing nearer to the way of Jesus. You like, maybe you find that out at some point, but I think the amount of grief and loss, like to find out that you only fit in and never belonged is a mind mess. To find out that you were needed but not wanted, and to find out that the recovery of yourself as God-given goodness, and then being asked to either choose the image of God in you or the image of this veneer that we're asked to step into that you just can't fit into anymore. Like, even good change is traumatic to a body, right? And so it is not, I don't know anybody that's in this process that is like, just for funsies, it's kind of cool. Like, I haven't literally, who is this person that they're referencing? Because I have not met them. I have met people in deep grief, processing deep trauma, like literal, actual clinical trauma, not just like, oh my gosh, that was so traumatic. Like no one is having that experience unless it is someone that's like using that humor as a protective mechanism. But when you actually connect to what's going on, it's deep grief, it's deep loss, and letting go of evangelicalism and the community that you've always known and the people that you wanted to be your people because they told you they were going to be your people is a huge thing. And it's a huge process. And it is one that requires, especially if you stay in a church faith community, requires incredible wisdom and care as you're holding people that have really feel like they've had their skin peeled off. And then they're coming to you going, somehow I still want to try community again. You know, it is, I just, that narrative, it's a protective one. And so I have compassion for people that have had to create this protective narrative around who the deconstructors are, because if they actually let themselves experience and be with and believe the people's stories, it would change the whole system.
You know, when we first left, I joked with a friend who's a pastor at another church that I had post-traumatic church syndrome. And I totally joked, and I realized, oh, this isn't actually a joke. This is for real.
Yeah.
And so often the narrative that you see out in the socials is that, you know, you can't just leave something, you have to go to something. And if you're deconstructing, let it be for a purpose to rebuild. And I think, you know, our time's almost up for this one. We're going to have to do a second part because we're only like, we got to the second question out of 5. Which I knew was going to happen. I love this conversation, but I think there needs to be a place and a space, even if you can't find it in the community, but you need to find within yourself during this process that it's okay if I'm just pulling shit apart right now. I don't have to put anything back together right now. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. But for now, what has been built for me doesn't serve me and doesn't reflect the Jesus that I know. So it's okay that I'm just pulling it apart. And it's okay if I'm just standing in the rubble for a while, because in the rubble, there's also freedom because there's no more walls holding me in, no more walls holding God in to a box that was far too small for them. And I think that if you're listening today, if there's nothing more you get from this, then it's okay and it will be okay. Just feel that. And I know with each of these powerful, intelligent, compassionate people that are on here with me today, we've each been in a spot where we're sitting going, oh my gosh, what did I do to myself? And we've been in a spot, thank you, God, for doing this with me. It goes both ways. And sometimes that moment is exactly the same. And so as we wrap up today, I just want to say, be gentle with yourself in this process. And be gentle for others in a process that you don't understand. There's space for us all, and Jesus is with us all. So for that, I'm going to say thank you guys for this part of the conversation. And I'm looking forward to the next part that maybe we'll get through 3 questions next time. I just love you all so much, and I'm grateful that you're willing to share your stories and bring some hope and community to the conversation. So thanks. We will continue next time.
Thanks, Nicole.
Cool.
Good, thanks, Nick.
Hello, She Loves community. I am Idalite McVicker, and I'm so excited to tell you about my new book that's coming out in April 2022. It's called Recovering Racists, Dismantling White Supremacy and Reclaiming Our Humanity. The book follows my journey of over 30 years and across 3 continents to shatter the lies that white supremacy had embedded deep within my soul. I hope to help white people realize that grappling with this legacy of white supremacy and recovering from our racism is lifelong work, and it requires both inner transformation and societal change. So if you long for healing, change, living into our common humanity, and for a different world, this book is for you. Learn more about the book at idalette.com. That's IDELETTE.com, and get up to 40% off and free shipping at bakerbookhouse.com. I would love to be on this journey with you.
We hope this episode inspired you to choose radical love. We hope these voices cultivated a curiosity that asks questions. Let us walk towards a new humanity together. We invite you to continue the conversation and join our online community of love, kindness, and accountability at She Loves Mag on Instagram. If you liked this episode, please subscribe and review our podcast on whichever platform you're listening from to help us spread the word about liberating faith. If you have any feedback or questions, please email shelovesmagazine@gmail.com. That's shelovesmagazine@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.